Hare Krishna. Welcome to our channel, Bhagavad-gita. Here it is, because we have Bhagavad-gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. My name is Labanga Latika. We have just opened the chapter 14, the three modes of material nature, which is it's a good way of looking at things. And before reading this chapter, it may seem a little incomprehensible, but I hope that we can go through this chapter together and get a better understanding. Stay with us.
Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalang.
So we're reading the second verse today, and I think I will just quickly take the translation from the first verse also, because it refers back to it. The first verse is, "The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, 'Again I shall declare to you the supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection.'" So if we're looking for perfection, here we have some how to say, this process has worked for others, so it might also work for us. And this is text 2. Idang jnanam upashritya mama sadharmyam agataha sargipino pajayante pralayena vyathanti cha. By becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can attain to the transcendental nature like my own. This is still Krishna speaking. Thus established, one is not born at the time of creation or disturbed at the time of dissolution. So here we have a bit of a universal perspective, because usually we think about birth and death, but here we have creation and dissolution. That sounds more like the universe. And even at that time, we're not only, like, time of death is bad enough, time of birth as well. It's a very disturbing experience. What to speak when the whole universe is taken apart for the next cycle. So I will read the purport. After acquiring perfect transcendental knowledge, one acquires qualitative equality with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, becoming free from the repetition of birth and death. One does not, however, lose his identity as an individual soul. It is understood from Vedic literature that the liberated souls who have reached the transcendental planets of the spiritual sky always look to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, being engaged in his transcendental loving service. So, even after liberation, the devotees do not lose their individual identities. So this is a very important point. And once becoming even just a little bit familiar and absorbed in the Bhakti Yoga process, this is so self-evident. I'm a person and Krishna is a person. Krishna is that wonderful, beautiful, Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I just hope to be his servant in love. So liberation, that's what it means. Everything else falls away. All the false identification, all the complications of being on this material platform, in this bodily concept of life. But often when we hear the more generic idea of a spirituality or liberation, or then the whole concept is very vague. So Prabhupada brings us back to this understanding, and when we read Prabhupada's translation and commentaries, we never lose that perspective. And that's very good, because it's a very important perspective. If liberation means getting out of the bondage, getting out of the illusion, then we want to have our aim fixed on the actual truth, not just something that sounds good. Or it's like I have my last name. It's a little bit complicated, and I'm not particularly attached to it or fond of it, and I'm planning to change it. But I can't just change out of that name, I have to change to a name. So it's not just that I want to get rid of something that I'm not particularly interested in. To make a change, I have to go towards something that I actually want. So liberation doesn't just mean, oh, this material world is full of suffering, let me get out of it. Because we don't know where we are going, where we are heading. So, of course, if we read Bhagavad-gita, then Krishna will let us know, and it's very helpful. Generally, in the material world, whatever knowledge we get is contaminated by the three modes of material nature. Knowledge which is not contaminated by the three modes of nature is called transcendental knowledge. As soon as one is situated in this transcendental knowledge, he is on the same platform as a supreme person. Those who have no knowledge of the spiritual sky hold that after being freed from the material activities of the material form, this spiritual identity becomes formless without any variegatedness. However, just as there is material variegatedness in this world, in the spiritual world there is also variegatedness. Yes, this is kind of, how to say, it's a theory. It's a theory that is, as we were just saying, that is not based on where we're going, it's based on where we're coming from. If we're in this world and we realize this body is giving me trouble, other people are giving me trouble, the nature, the changing seasons and the natural catastrophes, there are so many things that give me trouble, so let me just get out of all of it. And out of it, then I will not be disturbed by everything that I don't want. And then my theory is I will go to a to an empty space of nothing, and I will also be nothing, or we will all be one, which kind of boils down to the same thing. This idea, this theory, does not come from spiritual knowledge. It comes from a negation of the material world, and that is not spiritual. We may think that if we get rid of everything material, then we will be spiritual. But if we don't have knowledge of what the spiritual existence is like, I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm just thinking of silly examples. Like when we're small and we go to school, and maybe the last few years of school, we're not particularly inspired and we're kind of bored with it. And then we're just hoping to get out of that. Like my son was saying that he wanted to take a sabbatical. He wanted to take a year off between one level of school and wherever he was going next. And then I'm saying, okay, so what do you want to do in that time? Do you want to travel? Do you want to work? Do you want to maybe join the temple activities? And he just looked at me and said, no, I just don't want to do anything. And I said, well, it's not going to work. You're not going to just sit down and do nothing in my house. That's not how we roll, exactly. And he was so surprised about that idea, because now it's a long time ago now. He's well situated in his life, and he has no problems doing things. But like spiritual life, it's also not like, okay, I went to school all my life and I had to do all these things, and I'm not going to do anything now, because that's not who we are. That's not what we are like. We are not doing nothing. Even in this world where we are bogged down with a material body, which gives us so many limitations, which makes everything so much more heavy, that we lose our natural lightness, ability, vision. We just kind of bogged down in this world by this material body and our own consciousness and our own karma, and everything that we associate with here keeps us in that place, in that consciousness. And then we don't know who we are, and we don't know where we're coming from, we don't know where we're going. So therefore, like we were reading in a couple of chapters back, the first word in the definition, Krishna's definition of knowledge, is humility. We have that humility that we may not know everything, and that's fine, that is all right. But then we should be open to hearing from someone who does know something. So Krishna knows something, because he's not limited to this material world. He's not limited by time and space. He has the full overview of everything, because everything comes from him. So here he's giving us some information. And then Prabhupada is kind of making it very clear that, okay, Krishna says here, one can come to the transcendental nature. So the transcendental nature does not mean that we become nothing and one with God. Don't make that mistake of getting sidetracked by something that isn't real, that isn't, how to say, eternal, that isn't real transcendental. So yeah, that's what we want to take with us from this one. So even in this world where we are a bit limited by being encased in a material body, even here we have activities, we have individuality, we have so many things. So on the liberated platform, there'll be more of that, not less. There are spiritual activities, and the spiritual situation is called devotional life. Yes. Those in ignorance of this think that a spiritual existence is opposed to material variety, but actually in the spiritual sky one attains a spiritual form. There are spiritual activities, and the spiritual situation is called devotional life. That atmosphere is said to be uncontaminated, and there one is equal in quality with the Supreme Lord. To obtain such knowledge, one must develop all the spiritual qualities. One who thus develops the spiritual qualities is not affected either by the creation or by the destruction of the material world. So that's setting a high bar. But it's also saying that it is possible. We may not be there, but it is possible to come to that point by being absorbed already here and now in spiritual activities, in devotional life. Because devotional life is not also limited by the material situation. It is available to us here and now. And Prabhupada says, that atmosphere is said to be uncontaminated, and there one is equal in quality with the Supreme Lord. So in this place, he uses the word contaminated by the three modes of nature, which means everything is tinged by those modes of nature, and they are the material modes of nature. They are not spiritual. And therefore, we hope here to understand, first, the principle that we are eternally spiritual lovers of God, and we belong in that existence that is built on that fact, where we can be engaged in spiritual activities of devotional life. But in this material world, everything is kind of covered by these modes of nature in one way or another. So it's good to recognize them. It's good to see what is and what is not material, and what is and what is not spiritual. And it's a little subtle. And so Bhagavad-gita doesn't start with this chapter, but at this point it will become very useful to us, so we can distinguish, so we don't get sidetracked, so we recognize when the material modes of nature kind of influence us or influence the situation. So we will continue reading this, and I hope it will be very interesting and very useful to you as well. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for watching. We aim for updates every Tuesday and Friday. Please come back. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down there. We also have some links and information for you. And there is, of course, the subscribe button. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
I'm a Hare Krishna, and I approve this message. Subscribe.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.